Hello, my name is John Peace with the Rural Route Review, and I'm here with my co-host today, Cindy Green. You want to introduce yourself to the viewers right quick?
Sure. Cindy Green. I live in Bristol, Virginia, and I'm really excited about this podcast. I'm going to take lots of notes.
Okay. And today we're here with Robert Anderson Jr. And Robert, I'm gonna go ahead and let you do your resume because I know it's a little bit lengthy because you've had a wonderful career of service, and I thank you for your service. And I'll turn it over to you, Robert.
Well, I'm just going to keep it short and sweet because I'm not one to toot my own horn, but yeah, as we was talking earlier, I'm third generation firefighter, come from a background of hardworking people in Wise County. My grandfather worked for the Southern Railway, was on the fire department, and my dad naturally followed his footsteps, and I followed in his footsteps. But I was actually the only one that really come from the volunteer ranks and went up through the career ranks. And it all started right here in Wise County. And I'm glad it is the best experience of my life, and I'm grateful that I've done that. I could have went many different ways. As many people know that my grandfather was on the railroad, and I took a lot of aspirations from him. And, he wanted me to be a railroader, but at the time, railroading was having a lot of issues and a lot of layoffs when the coal industry started collapsing. But I stuck with the fire service, and I'm glad I did. But I've had a great career. I just retired from the city of Bristol back in July, or actually August, sorry. And I've enjoyed every minute of it, of the career. And I'm back sort of full-time fire chief here at Appalachia in Wise County. But I hope that our conversations can be informative.
Yes.
I think we've got a lot to discuss, and I think the public needs to know a lot of things that they don't know. So I'm looking forward to our conversations.
Well, Robert, not only my family, but there's a lot of families around Bristol and Appalachia are glad you chose the fire department versus the railroad. Not that the
Yeah.
railroad people don't help us indirectly, but you
Yeah.
guys help us directly. And when we, at our worst times or when we have emergency, your guys are the ones, you and your people are the ones showing up at our houses, helping us and stuff. Robert, I'm going to start this. Why don't you give us a brief when you first started and how things were? It's like, because say I was on board supervisors 20 years ago, so I know some broad strokes from back then, and then we can kind of progress and talk about your career and
Yeah.
what's changed.
So, over the period of since I was started as a junior member in 1986, and at that time, the fire service was still way behind in technology, and we were still, using equipment that was pretty well outdated, and equipment that, it has progressed. Things like with computers and everything. You use a computer, 2 years later, you get a new computer. Things of that nature were really making progression, and the fire service wasn't. So when I first started, we still wore hip boots. We didn't have turnout gear, a complete set of turnout gear. I mean, I had equipment that was handed to me from the 1970s, early 70s. So we're 16, 17 years old in gear wise, and we were still using that type of gear. I will never forget it because I used to see old pictures of guys with the same gear with Polaroids back in the 70s. And I'm thinking, I'm still wearing that gear. But that was what was given to me. But you know what? I really want to be a fireman. And at the time, money was very scarce and there was not a lot of funding put in the fire department. I really didn't know at that time what funding meant to us. I just want to be a fireman. So it was just as I started learning in my career very early on and getting training and education, I realized that we were behind the eight ball, very much so. And then as time started progressing, the fire service started catching on to technology, and things really have progressed so fast now. I mean, the fire service, there's things changing every day right now for us. So, but I just seen us come from that staple of just no definition of growth within a period of about 40 to 50 years in technology. And equipment was still very old at that time. I mean, we were still using fire apparatus 40 plus years old. So it was a, big wake up call because as things progressed and we got to see exactly how things were making our job better, it was an eye opening experience.
Robert, quick question, and Cindy's going to echo on this question. Let's take Southwest Virginia. How many paid departments are they compared to rural? Because she's coming from Bristol, Virginia, and maybe you can give us that kind of breakdown.
Yeah. Basically, you have, three components of delivery of service. You have full career, which is like the city of Bristol, Roanoke City, and Virginia. Those are the only two that's really close to us that is full career. Then you have the combination departments like Chilhowie, Withville. I think maybe Withville now is fully career, but that's a wholly new developed. I don't know if they're fully combination or fully career, but in our area, you have several departments that are combination. Like Appalachia, for instance, we're a true combination department, which now most of our personnel are paid employees. We got 13 paid employees, and with very minimum volunteers. But what drives this is the introduction of EMS, and so the more and also the amount of call volume you have, plus the dynamics of your community. But what happens most of the time is when you start taking on the EMS element of things, it changes the whole dynamics of how you operate. EMS drives 90% of our calls, that's nationwide. When you take on that element, it creates more call volume naturally for your department. And then you have to have another set of skills, such as EMT and paramedic. And that creates more money that you have to operate that organization. You have to have, the facilities. You have to have more apparatus. You have more costs, more overhead. And then your insurance, all these factor into cost. This is something that we see occurring now in Southwest Virginia as departments are consolidating and taking this element on, but it's a huge undertaking. When we took it on in 2014, we had no idea.
Now,
So,
quick question. Let me stop you just for one second. When you said consolidated, what was being consolidated
um,
when you
now,
did the
in 2014, Appalachia, then it was a volunteer and then agency. 90% of most calls are EMS related, and that drives up call volume. And most people that volunteer, you can't answer 3 or 4 calls a day, especially in a volunteer situation in a rural area. And that's where a lot of departments are struggling and still struggling today. There's not many volunteer EMS agencies left, even in the whole state. So there are a few, but not very many. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't, it's just people don't have the time. And we'll talk about why volunteerism is dying, and that's a great topic. But it's a situation where the standards, what you got to have to be an EMT or a paramedic, and the time it's consuming, and it is very costly. So a lot of times, some of the fixes, what we were presented was, hey, you guys want to merge and take over EMS. Well, we took it on because we wanted to make sure our community was taken care of, and we've done that so far. It's been a struggle. I'm not going to lie. It's still a struggle, but we're making it work. I've got some great people under me, and I'm very thankful for them. And every day is a new day, and we're always finding something. There's a new fire start somewhere that we have to put out, and we'll talk about some of the things that really affect us, and then has really drove up the cost, for providing the service. And we'll talk about budgeting and things of that nature that directly affect us, and the cost the hidden costs that come along with doing a service basically is not being heard at the county level. We explain that to those folks, but it's not really being heard. We'll talk about that later.
So, you got any questions? I didn't want to cut you off.
This makes sense to me, but personally, I remember when I had a medical situation, and it surprised me that the fire department was who came. There wasn't an ambulance, it was the firemen that were carrying me out on a gurney.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea it was 90% of EMS calls are served by firefighters. I had no idea.
Yeah. Robert, how's that changed over your career?
Well, the call for service back, years ago, I mean, basically in the rural area, basically it was handled by local volunteer EMS agencies at the time. But, our work culture was also different. And people would let people off to answer calls and things like that. But the call volume was not as much as it is now. The call volumes have definitely raised, and that's a lot of factors due to many things. And the call for service, because now we have to wear many hats. We're an all hazards department anymore. And, one of the things that we started doing is answering a lot of calls that are just for basically just, blood pressure checks or things of that nature that typically you really didn't do years ago. But when people find out that you do those things, it becomes, hey, can you come and check my grandmother's blood pressure? Those type of calls are becoming very, very popular. Or the basic call where somebody's fell out of bed. We are doing a lot of those calls. There are a lot of calls that we go to a lot of times that are not directly tied to transporting somebody to the hospital. So, but what I'm saying is that just the community needs are being put upon us, to take care of that stuff. And these are some of the things I didn't do probably 20 years ago. It's just become a gradual thing where we now put, we're an all hazards type of organization where we're just taking care of everything.
Okay. I'm gonna give you a recent call, maybe a couple years ago with my mom. My brother and I were out of town. She fell and just couldn't get back up. Now she wasn't hurt. And of course, she called 911 and our local fire department, volunteer fire department Valley came out there and helped her. Now, is that a call that 20 years ago maybe would have just a sheriff's department would have come and a local deputy? And now that's gotten shifted over to EMS. It's a non-emergency, but just like you said, they need help.
I'm sure, as most elderly people that have some type of system in their home where it lets somebody know that they have fallen or they can push a button. Yeah, those calls are typically, you may have had law enforcement show up along with EMS, but now, Valley is like us. They're a department where they combine both fire and EMS. So probably back years ago, once they were just a fire department, you would have just got an EMS agency. So depends on where you're located. Like, for instance, a lot of localities still are divided. I mean, you still have an EMS agency and a fire department, but they're not put together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does.
So, yeah. But yeah, we still want those calls are very important because we know that those could be a serious issue. And, family members have making sure that their family members are taken care of. So
When you said all hazards, I can give you an example of just a few weeks ago here in Bristol. A friend of mine had a pipe bust in her basement and she's wheelchair bound. She couldn't do anything. She called the water department. They said it would take 30 minutes. Meanwhile, her basement's flooding. So she called the fire department and the fire department came out, and it was one of those really cold nights. And
Yep.
they had to bang on the water turn off at the street to get it turned off for her. But that's an example of, it's like, who do you call? You call the fire department. It's like a catch-all, apparently.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. Like I said, we do everything. We've done from stuff from we actually got a raccoon out of the attic one time because the particular, I'm not going to name names, but
Yeah.
there was a particular person working animal control was scared to death. So we, we had to get the raccoon out of the attic. Those are things we do. We work together with other agencies, but a lot of times if it's a situation like that, most definitely we've done it before. We've cut water off, and that just saves more damage to the homeowner. And a lot of times we'll do what we can to help those folks, because in the dead middle of winter, you don't want to be in a situation where you have to move out of your house, turn your heat off, things like that. But we do. We've done a lot of things. People may have a small electrical issue where we've isolated a circuit within the home, kept the home up so that, you didn't have to turn power off all the way to everything in the house, so they could get an electrician in the next day and fix that. So those are the kind of things that we as a department deal with on a continual basis.
Robert, in your experience, and I know you've been to national conventions or association meetings and stuff like that, and we're getting ready to get into our current situation right now. Do you see rural Virginia, pretty much in the same boat as other rural, areas in other states? And give us a little bit about how we compare to other states.
Well, comparatively, and that's a great question, because it brings up, and I travel a lot. Me and my wife, we get to, we love to go camping and stuff, and we travel a lot, and we get to see a lot of things. And we've been from Maine to Georgia in the Appalachian Mountains, and we call that rural Appalachia, and that encompasses all the way. And it's pretty much the same song and dance we see everywhere. The same, except Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, for some odd reason, their local volunteer departments get huge amounts of money for equipment, facilities, and you could drive in Pennsylvania, every 2 miles there's a firehouse. I'm kidding you not.
Mm.
So,
Well,
but
We might need to take a trip up there and find out what they're doing.
Yeah, but what they're struggling at is staffing. Just like that's the problem nationwide, staffing, because we're down about. I think I was reading some statistics. We're down about 450,000 volunteer firefighters nationwide now, comparatively to 2020. That's a huge amount of people. It's a 25% decline, and we're still seeing that decline today. And we'll talk about the reasons for that later on. Going through looking at rural America, as far as and I'm not really well versed in the western part of
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
the country. But I'm just, as far as the Appalachian mountain chain, I see the same things, the same complaints: no funding, no personnel, lack of equipment. I mean, it's the same problem that is, plaguing rural America in the eastern states. So there's a host of things that need to be addressed. And how do we do that? I've done a lot of thinking about that. So we'll talk about that too, how we can address. I think one of the ways we're going to have to do it on a national level. I don't think local level. States maybe, but if you think about it, the sheriff's departments are funded through DOJ. That is a direct stream of funding for local sheriff's office nationwide, and we're going to have to look at some kind of model to do that as well. I don't think there's no way around that.
Let's go back to it's like my first year on board of supervisors, 2005. Let's go back 20 years. What was the percent of funding that came from like localities, whether that be the town or the county, state? And probably got a few federal grants, maybe, but what were we looking at 20 years ago?
20 years ago, I think, and I had that pulled up, I think the county funded us $20,000 a year. And the localities, depending on which town, each town has a different funding mechanism for each department. When you're looking at the towns combined with the county, those funds are utilized, to enhance a department's capability. I know right now what we're at, and I've got to looking from basically where we were at 20 years ago to where we at now. Most of the county's different departments have gotten raises for every year in the budget, for operational costs. We have taken significant gains in our budget whatsoever, except for like every 5 years, maybe we get a little bit here. We're up from that 20,000 to 75,000 per department in the county right now. But you think about what $75,000 can do for your department. A new fire truck is $1.1 million. And most of our insurance is so expensive. We pay $45,000 a year just for insurance.
Now, Cindy, I'm sorry I'm butting in too much. I'm asking questions. Does each department have to get their own insurance, or is there any kind of cooperative policy or something like that? Just curious.
That's a great question because, some of the town departments, like for instance, Big Stone and Wise, I say that's a budgetary item that they pick up through their budget process. Departments like us that are 501c3, all that money is put into our general fund or our operational budget, and then that money is taken from there. So the money that we get combined from the town of Appalachia and the county of Wise goes for that budgetary line item. So, when we budget every year, everything, all of our expenses, and that's where we're seeing things go up. And that's, we try to explain, hey, there's 200% markup now in the stuff that we're utilizing as far as cost goes. And we just can't keep up with the cost. And that's the problem. Our insurances went up, cost of operations. We just lost a turbo and an ambulance the other day. It's $3,000 to replace. So
are you getting any support from someone's insurance? If they have insurance and you have to transport them to a hospital, if it's the fire department doing it, are you able to bill their insurance?
yeah, yes, most EMS agencies, whether you're fire-based or not fire-based, do revenue recovery and through billing of insurance. So that's how we afford our payroll, because we couldn't do that directly $75,000 is not going to pay you back.
No, it's not. And then I wonder also about the closing of rural hospitals, how that is bound to increase your expenses for operations as well because you've got longer transportation.
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate, like some agencies, like Lee County, naturally, that hospital was closed for, I don't know how, it was a couple years maybe, but they had long transports. They had to either, depending on what side of the county you were on, you had to go into Kentucky or you transported to Lonesome Pine. And if anybody knows you've been in Lee County, that's the biggest county in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Those transport times are hugely long. But we're fortunate here in where we live because we can either go to North Community or Lonesome Pine, depending upon which side of our district we're on. But yeah, there's in rural areas, if you don't have a facility for that patient to go to, those transport times are very long. And here's the thing: once that agency leaves their first new area, and you've got an hour of transport, what if you get another bad call? Yeah, we have automatic aid and mutual aid, but the problem is some of these agencies are good 25, 30 minutes away, or if they even get out at all, depending on staffing of that day, because now we're seeing rolling brownouts of stations everywhere because they just don't have staffing for that day. Even they're paid, some of the paid agencies are still having issues. And the general citizen doesn't know that. So when you call 911, ambulance doesn't show up. Okay. And there's statistics, and I'll give you some things that the state of Virginia done regarding this, and some of our response times are over an hour. Could you imagine waiting over an hour for an ambulance? That's unheard of.
Somebody's having a heart attack. I mean, they're having a heart attack. I'm gonna piggyback on Cindy's question there on reimbursement. Most of rural America, Medicare, Medicaid, some private insurance. When you do get reimbursed, is it even close to your cost? I mean, just give us the facts. I mean,
Yeah, I'll give you the facts, and there is a funding level depending on rural versus non-rural or urban. So Medicare has a different pay scale, believe it or not, for what we get paid versus a non-rural area. So they make more than we do. Rural areas don't make as much. For example, an ALS call or advanced life support call, we may bill, like if somebody has a heart attack, everything that we utilize for that call is very expensive because we now have to purchase our own drugs. We used to be able to exchange at the hospital, but that was one of the things I was going to touch on. We had to spend around $15,000 just developing a specialized room with high security, had to get DEA license, and now we had to buy our own drugs. So we were already under the 8 ball, still not making enough money. And all of a sudden, now we're having to take on this element of the DEA problem. But when we go out here on a call, if we run let's compare Medicaid versus Medicare. A Medicaid call, no matter what we do, if my dogs bark,
that's all right.
The mailman's out there. But anyhow, Medicaid versus Medicare. So there's a huge difference. Medicaid, basically, if we take a patient that's having a heart attack, for example, we use all the drugs and everything, and we take that patient to the hospital. That's about between a $1,200 to $1,500 call. That basically what we bill for. So that being said, we're probably only going to make about $125 to $150 off that call through Medicaid. That's a loss.
Yeah.
That's a loss for us because, all the medications, sometimes the needles that we use, some needles are $125. If we have to, what we call an IO needle, have to replace that, it's very expensive. It depends on what we utilize in the field. That cost can even be up more for us. So, Medicare, will probably make about $600 to $700 on that call. Just depends on, and that all has to be the guys that are working and gals that are working the call have to make sure that call is completely documented. If there's one thing left out, you start losing money. Coding is very important. So if we don't do something right on our end, it costs us money as well.
Wow.
And it's a continual problem that, and that money does not generate enough, as far as call volume goes, to really pay for all the salaries that we need to pay for. So, and, it's
Robert, you said this a little bit earlier that rural gets less. Okay, to me, your driving distances are longer. We can't buy in bulk. I mean, it looked like to me It ought to be the reverse.
Yeah, you would think, but it's not. It's also tied basically to federal funding as well.
Okay.
I mean, we had to lose. We lost a grant on a ladder truck through FEMA because the actual price of the ladder truck was around $1.7 million. We won that grant, and we applied for like 5 years in a row to replace our area. But what happened was at the notification of funding, because we were under 100,000 in population, the maximum grant allowed was $1 million. So we had to come up with $700,000 on our own and I missed that in the notification of funding when I read through it. And I was like, so if you're a community over 100,000, it went up to 2.5 million. So you could have, and I'm like, so we're making a difference for less than 100,000 population versus over 100,000 population.
And the truck costs the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also the over 100,000 population have a bigger tax base. You
Oh,
probably
yeah.
have a bigger business base to tax. I mean, your revenues are better. I mean, you ought to get
Exactly.
more local. Okay.
Exactly. And so these are the same things we run into all the time. And there's just a huge disconnect in rural America as it relates to the needs. Because in my opinion, and I'm sure everybody shares the same opinion, it doesn't matter whether you're in Loudoun County or Fairfax County, that they get the same, they get service. When you pick up 911, they get service in 3 to 4 minutes. I know we live in a rural area where response times are a little longer, but that's the citizen that picks up 911 in Wise County, Lee County, Scott County, it doesn't matter. When they pick that phone up and dial 911, they expect service. And why are we making it so much difficult on rural fire and EMS when all we need is the tools and things we need to work with? And we're just not getting that. I mean, I've been in so many meetings. I've been to Richmond, and just, pouring our case out. But legislators, even our local, politicians are just so disengaged. They just don't really get it. And it's a huge problem. And I'll be honest with you, the ship's sinking. And if we don't, the next 5 years is going to be a huge telltale in rural fire and EMS in Southwest Virginia. You're going to start seeing departments closed. Right now, we got departments on that same, they're walking the plank. They really are.
Well,
We're struggling.
won't you tell your daddy something? When I was on the board, I thought I was doing good, doubling the amount, but it started at 15,000, and we went to funding third. And I told Cindy before you got on the call, I should have gave y'all triple that. I just did not know.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem with politicians and with the voter and with just the general citizen. It's not just, and this is not a bipartisan. I mean, this is a bipartisan issue. Don't matter which side of the fence you're on.
Absolutely.
When you pick up that call and dial 911, yeah.
Yeah. And to give you case in point, you brought up a good point. What's the funding formula? When did you actually leave the Board of Supervisors, John? What year was it? In 2013, I'm going to show you this so you guys can see it. I know we're getting into, but I don't know if you can see this or not. This was the fire impact study that was done by Virginia Department of Fire Programs in Wise County in 2013. And great material to still look at. It needs to be updated, but there are so many things in here that this pointed out that could have directed our county leaders to help us. It is a blueprint to go off of. That never transpired. The only thing that's come out of that is we now have an association countywide, and we have 2 board of supervisors who are liaisons back to the county. That's the only thing that we got out of that whole thing. But in there, it basically, there is no funding formula for Wise County at all to fund fire and EMS. And that's, and how we get that formula is we sit down and we look and we bring consultants in and give them data, take every community. But we have people at our board of supervisors who don't even think they need us. That's the truth.
Well,
We're a hindrance, that's sad.
Well, and I told Cindy this. In my lifetime, I've been very fortunate. I've only called 911 once for the sheriff's department, once in my lifetime. Very fortunate. You know how many times I've had to call for rural fire and rural EMS, especially when as my parents got older. I mean, I can't even count the times. And I think back on that and on the funding and stuff. Think Cindy, I'm gonna let Cindy ask you a question. I know she has a question about Bristol, Virginia Fire Department and how that's doing. You had a career there and yeah.
Yeah, so do you feel like they're getting adequate funding? I think the budget, they're getting ready to analyze their budget. City council is here. It may be tomorrow night when they're going to share a draft of it. What are your thoughts on that, or are you able to share?
Well, since retiring, I haven't really followed the logistics of the department or their budgeting, but I know they've changed fire chiefs now, so
Mhm.
he probably has a whole different direction. And I'm sure, as always, in the city of Bristol, it's been an issue with staffing, always has been. And we took on an ambulance because the EMS system was having trouble. And when we took on that ambulance, they took staffing off 2 engines, 2 apparatus to staff that ambulance. And that's been a hindrance because once you start taking staffing off an ambulance and you staff an engine with 2 people, that's not adequate staffing for a fire. So if you're going to staff an ambulance, you need to add additional staffing to staff the ambulance and not take away off of your engines. That's that that that's been a thorn in everybody's side there. It still is. But and a lot of departments do that because of cost. But
Sure.
that's not a way to deliver service. 2 people on an engine is not effective. And it happens. It's happened. They've had fires where they've rolled up with 2 people and they're, victim trapped. And that limits your capabilities of performing rescues because you're one person out. There's one thing you can only do. You need 2 people, but it puts you in a compromised situation because it makes you you're going to have to vacate and do something to try, somebody's screaming for help or they're inside there. You're going to do what you
Right.
until help gets there,
Right. One other thought I had, how do you think the having the casino taxed the fire and EMS system in Bristol, did they see an extra, when I say taxing, I mean more calls is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, and naturally, when the casino went in, the call volume picked up in that area, and naturally for just a host of reasons. When you add more people to
Mhm.
actually and you populate that, you're going to generate calls, and that could be from medical to somebody who's unfortunately overdosed or um, you know basically just had some type of medical emergency, and because you've created an area where there's a lot of population.
Yeah. Well, Robert, I promise I'll just keep you about 30 minutes today. This will be part one for viewers and stuff,
Yeah.
because
We need to
let me
do
tell you,
this again.
and our next one we'll get into maybe budget stuff. We might start talking about a little as far as government funding and stuff. I want to thank you so much. I
Yeah,
mean, so much
appreciate you
for
guys.
coming on, and we're going to do some more of these, and hopefully we can get it out to not only your brothers and sisters on other fire departments so they can share. We got to really educate the public
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
it's already a crisis, but it's a crisis most people don't even know we're experiencing. Yeah.
Now what I've got to show you is gonna really, if it don't scare you, it's a lot of the things that's going on and happening, and right now it's we got to beat the drum. These legislators, I know we're we've been in a legislative session, and some of the bills that we already had up there have been killed to help us, but we got to keep beating the drum because if you don't, we've got to get our local leaders involved, and Todd Pillion and some of those folks. We got to get them on board to say, hey, we got to keep continuing to beat the drum because Southwest Virginia is suffering so badly. And Terry, I forgot about Terry, but we got to really keep beating the drum, and if we don't, then we're not going to have services. It's just going to be each for their own, back like it was in the early age. So, and it's a major problem, and I'm sounding an alarm, and we need to get this out here to everybody. That's, hey, we don't do something soon, we're going to be in a catastrophic situation.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you,
All right,
Cindy.
brother.
We'll get together
Thank
soon.
you.
Okay.
All right, see you guys.
Bye bye.